And do you have it?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Well, everybody, welcome to another episode of 1+1, your place for inconvenient truth-telling and myth-busting. And very happy that we are rejoined by that we are rejoined by Cindy Sheehan, host of Cindy Sheehan's Soapbox, a fantastic anti-war, anti-imperialist activist and thinker, and the coordinator of the Women's March on the Pentagon. Cindy, thank you for joining us back on 1+1.
Thank you for inviting me. It's nice to talk to you again.
Oh, pleasure. Pleasure is all mine. It's fantastic to have you. And all right, let's get to
cheers.
Actually, exactly. we're both experiencing awful heat waves and dehydration. So
a lot of people think this is moonshine that because I have it in a jar that I make myself in my bathtub, but I don't have a bathtub, so it's water.
Yes, and this blue drink is not an alcoholic drink either. It is a Gatorade, and I'm told it's supposed to help with stomach problems sometimes. So there you go. All right, Cindy. Before we get to some of the big questions I wanted to ask you, I have to ask you this question, which is when you were organizing your protest against George W. Bush, that empty-headed windbag is back in the news. He's painting pictures of immigrants and how America needs to respect immigration, all of that. But I wanted you to talk about now when you organize those protests outside of George W. Bush's near his ranch and outside of his ranch in Crawford, Texas. I know you got a lot of very vicious hate mail and a lot of hate talkers, from the more rabid far right, elements of the press, like Bill O'Reilly, Fox News, and so forth. And so I had to ask this question, which is what was it like when O'Reilly went famously on the David Letterman show, and Letterman couldn't hide his disgust for O'Reilly, and O'Reilly, of course, mentioned you by name, and he, slammed you for your opposition to the, to the Iraq War and calling the Iraqi resistors freedom fighters, and Letterman, famously shot him down, and it became, a pretty, epic, mud wrestling match on television. So I have to ask, what was it like, having David Letterman, who's famously, like all those late night comics, very, apolitical or middle down the road or very, centrist liberal. What was it like when Letterman, defended you against, Bill O'Reilly?
It was pretty cool. So this is 15 years ago. 15 years and 10 days ago was the first day of Camp Casey in Crawford, Texas. So we started August 6th in 2005. But I remember when Bill O'Reilly went on David Letterman, and David Letterman actually brought me up. He was like, I just can't see how you could, besmirch the name of Cindy Sheehan. She lost her son, this mother who lost her son. And so Bill O'Reilly said something like, nobody comes on my show and calls terrorists freedom fighters. Well, there's two things wrong with that. Number one, I never went on Bill O'Reilly's show ever. He invited me many times. I refused many times. Secondly, I didn't call terrorists freedom fighters. I called the people of Iraq who were battling U.S. oppression and U.S. occupation. They were freedom fighters. So Bill O'Reilly made probably the statement was correct. No one goes on his show and calls terrorists freedom fighters, but he implied that I had been on his show and called terrorists freedom fighters, which were two different things. But just a lot of stuff like that happened during that time period.
But I would imagine. I don't know if you were even a fan of the Letterman show or the Tonight Show with J Lo, but that must have been kind of cool having
It was
Letterman.
cool. We were also during Camp Casey. There was a really funny segment on The Daily Show, and it was about Camp Casey. They said something about our nightly electric light parade down Prairie Chapel Road. It was really hilarious. There was a lot of things. I got nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize that year. I was in the running to be Time Person of the Year. So there were a lot of just bizarre things that happened. I mean, I went to Jesse Jackson's birthday party that year in Los Angeles, and Jesse, I had already known Jesse before Camp Casey, okay, and he called me every night, like probably around midnight, to just pray for me, because I'm not a Christian or whatever, but it was nice that he was thinking of me. It was nice that he put some thought into, because it was very stressful. So just to have somebody kind that would call. But I met, while I was there, I met Anthony Kiedis, however you say his name, from Red Hot Chili Peppers. And so I had him call my daughters to talk to them. And one of them answered the phone, and then one of them got a message. And I just said, yeah, it's not so bad being my child once in a while, is it? And then my son got to go with me to an event in Los Angeles where, he got to meet Martin Sheen and Daniel Ellsberg and Tom Hayden and things like that. So yeah, it was quite extraordinary. Now, of course, since I left the Democrat Party, none of those people will have anything to do with me.
I wasn't even going to bring that up. I was going to say that it must be so. Actually, wait one moment. I was going to say that it must have been so surreal when you're kind of a celebrity lefty in your own right, and you are rubbing shoulders with with people like that who are taking on your cause, or they're showing solidarity. And then it just must be so surreal when all of a sudden it's Twilight Zone and it's, Cindy, are you going to endorse Nancy Pelosi? Are you going to endorse Hillary Clinton? Who do you prefer, Hillary Clinton or Obama? And then
Barack Obama, yeah, it was. I lost a lot of support, and I lost a lot of contacts and stuff when I left the Democrat Party. I got a lot of support when I ran against Nancy Pelosi, though, but I think in 2008. But I think there was a lot of support from anti-Bush people because she refused to impeach Bush and Cheney, right? So I did get a lot of support for that, and but I just thought these people were anti-war that I was working with, and I thought the celebrities were anti-war, but they were really just anti-Bush. And so, of course, when Obama became president, then all the things we protested Bush for became they either ignored them or they started making excuses for the behavior. And I can't do that. It's like, if I don't have any money and if I don't have any friends, at least I can look at myself in the mirror at the end of the day.
Well, I wasn't even planning on asking this question, but yeah, just as a follow up to what you were saying, I mean, what do you say to young people, those who are coming of age and are starting to develop an anti-war, anti-imperialist consciousness, and so they want to get involved in the movement? And what do you say to them? Because I'm sure you probably sit down with them and you probably say to them, okay, if you're going to get involved in this movement, and if you're going to get involved in the broader left movement, warning, because you're going to get people pulling you into the Democratic Party, and once you start speaking out against such and such, in Obama, a Clinton, you're going to get, flack, and you're going to be considered radioactive. And then, of course, and we talked last time about how it's one thing when you get the New York Times, the Boston Globe, the Los Angeles Times, all endorsing, the Democrat-friendly establishments, a Clinton and Obama. Now, of course, it's Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. But then you have the the more left-leaning press, your Nation magazines or your Democracy Nows, who also prop up, the rival oligarch parties, and they're not going to be talking about a Dennis Kucinich. They're not going to be talking about a Tulsi Gabbard or a Mike Gravel. They're going to be, discussing, well, lesser to evilism, and what does the movement do when we have an Obama presidency or a Clinton Joe Biden presidency. So what advice do you give to activists who are the newcomers into the anti-war, anti-imperialist movement?
Well, first of all, when I first became noted or whatever, a lot of people tried to tell me the same exact things, and I was like, no, really. Nancy Pelosi really wants to help us end the war. I really wanted to believe that these organizations like MoveOn.org or The Nation or Democracy Now! I really believed, I didn't want to believe, I believed that they were actually in it to help us end the wars. And so, of course, by 2007, when the Democrats took control of the House of Representatives and Nancy Pelosi became the Speaker of the House, and impeachment was off the table, but war funding was on the table. And so they kept on voting to give George Bush more money for wars and to do his surge. At that point, it was a surge that they wanted to do in Iraq, and the Democrats didn't stop them. So in around May of that year, I left the Democrat Party, and that's, when all this stuff hit the fan. But so you can tell somebody what your experience was, but you can't make people hear, and nobody could make me hear. I thought I was new to the movement. I was a very trusting person, and so I trusted these people, and so that was my bad. So I just tried to tell them about my experience, but I also tried to show them the history of the Democrat Party, the history of the Republican Party, the history of imperialism here in the U.S., which is fostered and supported by both parties. So, and that's about all you can do. And another thing that I try to focus on with these young activists is burnout, is you don't have to. Take it from somebody who's been doing this now for 16 years, since my son died. My son was killed. There's a very trite saying, but it's not a sprint, it's a marathon. And but I just look at this and say, but we can't stop, because where would we be if it weren't for the people during Vietnam? Where would we be if it weren't for the people during the civil rights movement? And the labor movement and the feminist movement. Where would we be without all these people who worked really hard? But then you see a lot of these movements have been co-opted by liberal forces, and they channel these movements into getting out the vote. It all becomes get out the vote. Right? We got to get out with the vote for the Democrats. The Democrats have to take power. But if we can't look at recent history since 9/11 and point to the escalation of U.S. imperialism around the world through active bombing, through the use of unmanned aerial vehicle bombing, the use of sanctions, crippling, brutal sanctions, supporting proxy wars with real terrorists in places like Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, the complete destruction of Libya when Obama was president and Hillary Clinton was Secretary of State, which has turned that country into just, I can't say. I'm trying to think of a word that doesn't have a swear word in it. Yeah, into a complete hellhole with human trafficking and slavery. If they can't see that, then by now, then what are we going to do? And this is what really bothers me, Youri, is that every 4 years, it's like, well, it doesn't matter who's running, who the candidates are. It's the most important election of our lifetimes in history. And if we just get the Democrat in, we'll be able to hold his or her feet to the fire. And then, but that's just crap. Because that's what they told me about Obama. Cindy, we have to get Obama. He has to say these things to get elected. And if we just get Obama in, then we can hold his feet to the fire. And I was like, oh, you get him in. I'll hold his feet to the fire. I voted for Cynthia McKinney that year. She was running as a Green. And as soon as Obama got in and I tried to hold his feet to the fire, people started attacking me. You know what they said? Give him a chance.
Yeah.
So on Facebook, I've said, don't even tell me you're going to hold Biden's feet to the fire because you're lying. And I don't want to hear it. Because if we hold a Democrat's feet to the fire, they say that gives fuel to the Republicans. Like, if it weren't for people of principle calling out the crimes of our government, then, the other party wouldn't notice. It's like it's only our voices that are calling attention to these facts of life. It's extraordinarily frustrating.
Yeah, I mean, I don't, I'm not going to spend too much time talking about, the ridiculous circus and the ridiculous bloodbath, which is going to be, the 2020 election. I think what gets under my skin, though, is, I have friends and I've had guests on the show who have, who have expressed to me that they're going to, vote for Joe Biden. And you know what? Okay. Vote for him. I'm not gonna bad talk you. I understand the arguments. When you have someone as grotesque as Trump, but whatever you do, don't look down upon don't think that just because you're voting for Joe Biden that you can make fun of Trump supporters. Then when the guy is clearly. And this is not even me saying that. These are like friends of mine who don't even follow politics that much, who all say to me, "What's up with Joe Biden? Is he there?"
Well, he's not there. And like Margaret Kimberly, she calls Kamala Harris Cop Mala Harris. I mean, it's like she said that, Joe Biden said he was going to pick a woman of color for his VP, and he picked a woman of color, but he picked one that is so ensnared in the establishment. She's a prosecutor. She was the head cop of San Francisco, the head cop of California, and it put so many people in prison and wanted to keep people in prison. She said that's because where we get our cheap labor. She actually said that. And so to me, there might be a case of making Trump the lesser evil in this case, So and I don't have a horse in the race because I'm not going to vote for either one of them. So, it's just frustrating that people are so emotional. It's like they make all, and it's when we make decisions, we should have a holistic approach, right? We should get facts. We should see how it would affect other people, how it would affect ourselves, how it will affect the community. We should also, because we're human, we're going to have emotions, come up in anything. But everybody just like it's like their beings are attached to who's president of the United States when it doesn't matter. They're not the ones who are in charge. Until we overthrow capitalism.
I think you and me probably have also experienced similar things when it comes to Bernie Sanders, who I did used to support. I was definitely what Jeff Sinclair might have called a Sandernista, but I stopped feeling the burn the moment Bernie started to push all this stupid anti-Russia conspiracy theories, didn't support the DNC lawsuit, and then that's when I realized, oh wow, all those things that Chris Hedges, John Pilger, and Paul Street were saying about Bernie Sanders,
and Cindy Sheehan.
Yeah.
From the beginning.
You were all vindicated, and that's when that's when I stopped feeling the burn, and I became very much, critically outspoken against Bernie Sanders. But you do have some people who, and this is also the same problem I have with with Jeremy Corbyn back in Britain, who his whole life, he spoke out against, this war, that war, was part of this social justice campaign and that social justice campaign. But the moment, he became leader of the opposition, it was like all of those people power movements that got him there were completely thrown under the bus. And the moment he was being smeared as an anti-Semite, the moment him and his entire leadership team said that there is an anti-Semitism crisis, we're dealing with it, I thought to myself, wait a minute, what? Right. And that's when I kind of disavowed Jeremy Corbyn, and it's very difficult to have conversations with people about what happened in Britain with the loss of the Corbyn project. I mean, yes, you can blame the corporate media. Yes, you can blame the entire British establishment, and you can even blame a lot of the enemies within Labour. But the moment Jeremy Corbyn and his entire leadership said that there is an anti-Semitism crisis, we're dealing with it, and they started to throw Venezuela under the bus, and they threw Syria under the bus, and started to ramp up anti-Russia hysteria. I mean, they dug their own graves.
Right. And the same thing with Sanders. He reminds me of somebody like Kucinich. I like Dennis Kucinich. I think Dennis Kucinich is probably one of the best congresspeople the United States has had in the last, several decades. But I think they play a role in keeping people in the Democrat Party. Good anti-war people, pro-justice people. They play that role in keeping them in the party. And even though Sanders is allegedly independent, in his heart and soul, he's a Democrat. He caucuses with them. In many cases, we saw in the big array of people who were running for the Democrat nomination that he voted more with the party than a lot of them did. So Bernie Sanders is always voting with the Democrat Party, and when he endorses just such horrible scoundrels as Bill Clinton, Hillary Clinton, Joe Biden, that just shows he's just part of the problem, not part of the solution. And he could easily run as an independent and say, I'm taking all of my support, all of my supporters, all of my voters, all of my donations, and I'm really going to fight for the people. But he just always folds seamlessly back into the establishment, back into the party.
Well, then one final question to that before I get into these ones is, well, okay. Now I'm sure Bernie Sanders supporters and even myself would probably would probably counter that argument by saying, well, Cindy, if Bernie doesn't support whoever the Democrat nominee is, they're going to just boot him out of the party like Cynthia McKinney, or they're just going to smear him endlessly and destroy him like a Ralph Nader. So therefore, Bernie has to have this this two-barrel approach where he is an independent, he is a socialist, and he is with the people power movement, but he has to fight the Democrats from from within. And even if he did run as, you know, an independent, even if he ran for the Socialist Equality Party, Party for Socialism and Liberation, or even the Green Party, he, you know, he would just lose come 2016, come 2020.
Well, like I said, it's better to lose with your principles intact than to, you know, fold back into a criminal, murderous, corrupt party. And if he had principles, he wouldn't even run with the Democrats. He wouldn't caucus. Sometimes he could caucus with them, because even though we don't agree with people, sometimes our you know, our goals are the same, so we can work with some people, even people that we vehemently oppose most of the time, if we have the same goals sometimes. So yeah, but that's why we are in the place we are, because nobody follows any core principles. Everybody follows the major political parties, which are principleless. They don't have any. The only principles they have are power and money.
Yeah, and although I'm not a fan of Dr. Ron Paul's, you know, domestic policies, and I know that there's a lot of controversy, you know, when it comes to his past, but you know, when he didn't get the Republican nominee, he basically said to all of his supporters, "Hey, if you're going to vote for the Republicans, okay, vote for them. But everyone else, if you want to vote for libertarians, go for it. If you want to vote for Ralph Nader, go for it. If you want to vote for any of these parties who are either, you know, anti-war or they or you think they're going to run the economy better, vote for them. But do not vote for Democrats or, you know, Republicans."
Right. That's what I admire Cynthia McKinney too, because she did fight to stay in Congress, but the party leadership and AIPAC really strove to defeat her, and they ended up defeating her. And when she was, and Bernie Sanders has been horribly treated by the Democrats, and he's still. I watched a documentary about Hillary Clinton, and she was interviewed a lot, and she straight up said, everybody hates Bernie. Nobody wants to work with Bernie in the Senate. And he's always saying he has friends, but nobody likes him. And so for him to just keep on folding back into that, to me, is like atrocious. So don't you have any self-respect, for one thing? You know,
Jeremy
but at
Corbyn,
least
Jeremy Corbyn, the exact same thing. The people who kept knifing him in the back, knifing him in the front, he appoints, you know, Tom Watson, you know, this complete, you know, horrendous, you know, Blairite, who has absolutely nothing in common with Jeremy Corbyn's domestic agenda, and of course, nothing in common with his foreign policy, and who smeared his supporters as anti-Semites, as a bunch of, you know, far-right trots and so forth like that. And Jeremy Corbyn appointed him to be a member of the House of Lords.
Well, see, no respect, no self-respect, no respect for the people, no principles. And but what I was going to say, at least when that happened to Cynthia, she left the party. So you have to have a lot of respect for her to do that.
Well, to quote the great Malcolm X, because I know Noam Chomsky uses the World War II cards in order to, you know, emotionally blackmail and voter shame people to vote for the Democratic Party. Well, I'm just gonna use my Malcolm X card, and and this will offend many people, and apologies to anyone who may not want to come on the show afterwards. But to quote Malcolm X, you know, anytime you keep voting for a party that can't even keep their promises, and you're still going around supporting them, you're not only a chump, but you're a traitor to your own race.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. And you're a traitor to the human race when you keep on voting for Democrats or Republicans. I can't. We shouldn't have to have this conversation anymore. We shouldn't have to, like, say clearly they're both don't deserve any support. It's just amazing that, and it's amazing that if we criticize Biden and Harris, we have to have the caveat, but we don't support Trump. Like, how come we have to say that? You know, we don't. If we say something bad about Trump, we don't have to say, but we don't support Biden or Harris. You know, so.
All righty. Well, on to onto the bigger picture, and this is a great segue to my first question. And the first question I'd like to ask you is about Afghanistan, which is the often forgotten war. It's now the longest war the U.S. Has fought in. There's also NATO involvement, so much of Europe and the EU member states, they're not innocent bystanders that were dragged along to that conflict. Many of them voluntarily joined in that imperial conquest. And we talked last time about good wars and bad wars, and how some of these good wars are sold to people. And so can you explain to an audience why the Afghanistan war is not the good war, but is a war of imperial conquest, and one which should be getting global protests like World War I, the Vietnam War, and the pre-Second Iraq War invasion?
Well, first of all, I have to say that there has been longer wars in U.S. history. The wars against our indigenous people, racism. I mean, we're still fighting those wars, but Afghanistan is probably the longest foreign war, and so and this is like, some people think every war is a good war. Every U.S. war is a good war, because if the U.S. is doing it, then they must have good intentions. Some people like me says there can't be justification for a war of imperialism, which any war, I can't think of. The War for Independence and the Civil War were probably two of the only wars that weren't wars for imperial. Well, the Civil War and both wars opened up a lot of territory for expansion, right? And that was an hour from a very small little tiny part of the East Coast. That none of the rest of that stuff belonged to European colonists yet. So anyway, and there has been a lot of cases made against even like the War for Independence, the Civil War. There's been a lot of cases made that those weren't good wars either, and those are mostly from the viewpoint that killing each other can usually be avoided. It can probably always be avoided. It shouldn't be like one of the first resorts is to, oh, we're having a problem, so let's go kill a bunch of people. But that seems like that is like a paradigm in the United States. And so a lot of people make the case that World War II was a good war. Mm-hmm. But then we just have to look back at World War I, and if it weren't for World War I, World War II wouldn't even had a chance to happen. So anyway, but by the time it happened, of course the Nazism and fascism needed to be defeated. By the time the U.S. got into it, it was really terrible. But Afghanistan was based on the fact that the United States was attacked on 9/11. And so not one of the people on those airplanes that attacked us were Afghan. As a matter of fact, 16 out of the 19, I think, were from Saudi Arabia. And so the thing was the U.S. Propaganda at that time was that Afghanistan was harboring Osama bin Laden, who was accused of attacking the United States on 9/11, which was never, ever proven. As a matter of fact, all flights were stopped that day. except the Osama bin Laden, I mean, the bin Laden family was flown out of the United States. Anybody who was a member of the bin Laden family at that point was flown out of the United States. So there was even some points where the Taliban, they were saying, if we give you Osama bin Laden, will you just not invade us? You know? And so nothing was going to stop that war. And it's just so bizarre. It's like, how did that even happen? And then of course, after the invasion of Afghanistan and that war for a little while, then the United States said that Saddam Hussein had something to do with it. Saddam and Osama bin Laden were in on it together. So they started building a case against Iraq. And I would say definitely none of the wars, the bombings, the imperial expansion since 9/11 is justified or good.
But what would you, going back to what you were saying, but what would you say to people who say who say that well, Iraq, yeah, that was a complete imperial project from the get-go, because Iraq had been disarming itself after the first Gulf War, and and the brutal sanctions that were in place on it. But that Afghanistan was harboring Al Qaeda, Al Qaeda terrorists or Al Qaeda type of terrorists.
I don't know, were they? We weren't ever really given any proof about that. So, and it's just like, what harm did we really think? Did anybody really think that Afghanistan had the capacity to attack the United States? The Afghanistan presented an existential threat to the United States. No, they absolutely didn't, and they weren't involved in the crime of 9/11 either. So, and why if 16 of the 19 hijackers and as well as Osama bin Laden were Saudi Arabian, how come we haven't attacked Saudi Arabia? How come Saudi Arabia is such a good friend of the United States? How come Israel and Saudi Arabia and the United States make this kind of like trifecta of terrorism?
Well, some would say, well, Afghanistan became a hornet's nest of Islamists after the Afghanistan war, the Soviet Afghan war, and that under the Taliban, they did allow. I mean, of course, this is what the advocates claim. This is what the government says. That Osama bin Laden spent a lot of time in Afghanistan. He certainly was part of the Mujahideen. So therefore, it was right to attack Afghanistan, who did harbor these these terrorists.
Well, we did. That's what the United States says. And of course, all of this that was going on in Afghanistan is just blowback from the USSR proxy war that happened there, where Jimmy Carter and Brzezinski supported the Mujahideen. Maybe they even worked with Osama bin Laden during that time period. So all of a sudden, we destroy a country, destroy their support network during that proxy war between, like I said, the United States and the USSR and Afghanistan, and then are surprised when the United States gets exactly what it worked for. So when they support the Mujahideen and support radical Islamists, then it's almost like, oh, look, now we can say that they're our enemies now, and we can go and invade this country, and they're harboring Osama bin Laden, blah, blah, blah. Did they even catch Saddam Hussein? Did they even execute Saddam Hussein? You know, all of these things were lies. Every single thing that happened after 9/11, they actually were meeting in the White House saying, how can we, how can we like cherry pick intelligence to support our goals? How can we convince the American people? And in Congress, everybody except Barbara Lee voted for the authorization to use military force in Afghanistan. And so it's like they're selling, they sell the wars to us the same way that they figure out how to sell wars, the same way they figure out how to get us to buy products that are bad for us. You know, they're very masterful at this kind of manipulation. So even years after the events, where there has been WikiLeaks, where there has been other whistleblowers coming forward, where sometimes even politicians slip up and tell the truth once in a while. And even years after, there's still people making these cases. And so now the United States is involved in at least 8 countries in some kind of active bombing. The United States has hundreds of bases in almost every country on this planet. And we spend a couple $1 trillion every year on empire and empire expansion. You just can't look at the Pentagon budget because that doesn't tell the whole story about what the United States uses its resources for. And this country is turning into what Trump calls a shithole, even worse than it was before. I mean, in January, I would still like, oh, we got to end the wars. We got to, we need single payer health care. We need free education. We need to forgive all the debt of all the college graduates. So we're still fighting for a better country. And many of us would look back on pre-COVID with some kind of nostalgia. It's like our old normal was so abnormal, but our new normal is way over the top. And it's just, this is what we get when we just complacently take the NDAA, the Patriot Act, the spying on every aspect of Americans, which happened under Obama. We just like, oh, well, if we're not doing anything wrong, then it doesn't matter. And then all of a sudden we're in lockdown. And, people don't have the capacity or the energy, or we have just been, since 9/11, just beaten and beaten. And if you fear, you have to fear everything. And if you don't fear terrorism, which they use to put a lot of these measures in place, if you realize that, first it was Al-Qaeda, ISIS, whatever they're called now, ISIL, whatever's going on now. If you're not afraid of that, if after all these years you've recognized that we're probably not, Yemen isn't going to come over and invade us or whatever, then now we have this other thing that you can be afraid of. And so, it's just that we have been so conditioned in fear-based leadership that we have very little will to fight back anymore.
I know WikiLeaks, solidarity for Julian Assange. We really do hope by some miracle that he does get set free. Now, WikiLeaks, of course, and Chelsea Manning, who gave the documents to WikiLeaks, famously showed systematic war crimes. Iraq is the one that often gets a lot of attention, but Afghanistan, oddly enough, doesn't get as much attention compared to Iraq. And I think, and this goes to the fact that Iraq is seen as bad war. Afghanistan is kind of seen as, as good war. But there was a lot of systematic war crimes, which the Americans, their NATO allies, and that they did in Afghanistan. Can you talk to us about the Afghanis that the U.S. and its allies sided with when they invaded Afghanistan and toppled the Taliban? Because we hear a lot about the human rights abuses of the Taliban, and they should be condemned. But the Northern Alliance, I mean, wow. I mean, talk about like, wow. Do I want to be tortured to death, or do I want to be raped and then murdered? Because the Northern Alliance also did some pretty horrendous things. So can you talk about those Afghan allies that the U.S. and its allies sided with in Afghanistan?
Well, it's just like the terrorists that the United States is siding with in Syria, and so they side with people in their policy for regime change. And then, like in Afghanistan, when they did, chase the Taliban out of, I can't even think of the capital of Afghanistan this morning. Anyway, when they chased them, they put in their puppets, right? Was it Khalilzad? Or was he in Iraq?
Hamid Karzai.
Okay, Khalilzad, I think, was in Iraq, and he was a oil executive, right? That hadn't lived in Afghanistan. Chevron, I think, hadn't lived
Unocal.
Oh, okay. And so, thank you for correcting my, my senior moments here. It's been a long time.
No worries.
And so, yeah, we're going on 19 years in October, right? 19 years of being in Afghanistan, just completely ridiculous. And then we saw Obama do his surge when he was just elected in 2009, 2010. So yeah, the United States finds the most vicious groups in each country that it can align with, like they do in places like Venezuela. They find the counter-revolutionaries, and they find people who are doing it not for the good of the country, not for the good of the people, but for their own good and for their own profit. And that's the people that they work with in these countries.
Unbelievable.
And they work with Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia is probably the most vicious state on the planet.
Is actually, now we know a lot about Pakistan's involvement in Afghanistan, but when Bush did topple the Taliban, was Saudi Arabia and the Gulf states also very much involved in?
I don't know. I just keep on coming back to, if we've spent 19 years destroying Afghanistan, we've spent the same amount giving military aid and other friendship to Saudi Arabia,
who's probably exporting radical Sunni Muslims into Afghanistan.
And look what they're doing, with Yemen, destroying, and the other Arab states too are involved in destroying Yemen for some reason, because they don't like the slightly progressive government that the people wanted in.
And then then a follow-up question on Afghanistan is, what do you say to those who are weary of leaving Afghanistan because they think a return to the Taliban is throwing the Afghans under the bus, and some might even use the U.S. pulling out of Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos as the reason why Pol Pot's risen and unleashed, his reign of terror on the Cambodians. What do you say to those who will probably use that argument as to, we need to stay in Afghanistan because if we leave Afghanistan, it's going to be the Taliban and we're throwing the Afghans under the bus?
Well, first of all, Vietnam has turned into a success story, I would think, since the United States left. And another thing is that the United States military, okay, this might be like a bolt of lightning to some people. But the United States military and the United States government are not humanitarian organizations. The longer they stay enrooted someplace, the worse that it becomes. And so what we're saying is kind of like this white savior complex, right? Is that
yeah. White man's
these people are backwards, they're savages, and we can't trust them to run their own country. You know, we shouldn't trust them to run their own country. And it's not about, see, this is what we need to tell people. The United States military is not occupying these countries to make them better. They're occupying these countries to extract all of their minerals, all of their oil, all of their resources for profit for the few. That's why the U.S. military is in these places, not as humanitarian organizations. And if anybody thinks that the U.S. military is a humanitarian organization, do you think the people of Vietnam were not hugely relieved when the U.S. military, over 3 million people were killed by the United States, their country destroyed. They are still dying from Agent Orange exposure. They're still having babies who have birth defects. They're still stepping on mines, you know. So the country left it in a huge mess. So I think that's just really, that's the bottom line is and I was told I was in Sweden, I think, and I was told by a reporter that Sweden was only in Afghanistan for humanitarian purposes. I'm like, so you're telling me they carry shovels instead of guns? And that shut them up. So I said, no, there's no occupation that's humanitarian.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned Sweden, because I also mentioned that NATO is involved in Afghanistan, and all of those anti-American, war protesters. Yes, throw every mud you can at the United States, but if your country is in NATO and is involved in Libya and in Afghanistan, then I'm sorry, your governments are also not innocent. Partners are not the good cop to America's bad cop, and I would also say, if anyone wants to use, the whole Pol Pot argument, well, Pol Pot, he got into power with the aid of the United States as a way to, get back at Vietnam.
Right.
Then. This is the perfect segue then to this next question. And I want to talk to you about Cuba, because the last time you were on, you expressed solidarity with Cuba. You also expressed solidarity with Telesur, which is a socialist, communist, Latin American news outlet, mostly funded by whatever state wants to fund Telesur. And so I wanted so I want to talk to you about your solidarity with Cuba, and because I know you and we advocate détente with Russia, détente with China, which are two states I'm certainly not fond of, but we also want an immediate end to sanctions on Iran, Syria, Nicaragua, and the embargo on Cuba. But what's your response to people who will angrily tell you and angrily tell me, why do you guys advocate détente with Cuba, which is a communist tyranny? Why do you guys want détente with China and Russia, which are autocratic nations, but then demand that we support BDS on Israel and breaking off, relations with Saudi Arabia, while we also advocate, détente with Iran. So what do you say to those people? Because they do exist on both the left and the right. So you do have people on the left.
Oh yeah, no, there are. Yeah. Well, first of all, I have the pleasure of being in Cuba many times. You know, as an American, there's very few of us that can say that we've spent a significant, or if any, time in Cuba. You know, so it was against the law to go for a long, long time. And so, first of all, calling something communist, to me, that's not bad. That's not a bad thing. You know, I'm a socialist, so I don't have a problem with a communist state that actually cares about its people, where everybody has health care, everybody is entitled to education, all the way up to university. You know, Cuba, instead of sending military around the world, they send doctors. If there's a problem, they have doctors, engineers, teachers on planes ready to go help. In fact, they had dozens of doctors ready to fly to New Orleans to help during Katrina, and the U.S. denied their permission to go there. So there are vicious imperialist colonial states, and Israel and the United States are two of those places. Israel is more paranoid in its own little area. The United States just wants everything. They just want the whole world. China and Russia are not like that. China and Russia are not, with all the problems that they have, they're using like dollar diplomacy or whatever, yuan diplomacy or ruble diplomacy. They go and they provide support most of the time. And so as a matter of fact, Venezuela, I'm also a strong supporter of Venezuela and the Bolivarian Revolution. Mm-hmm. You know, China and Venezuela have worked out some beneficial trade agreements for both of them, you know, and I can see that the United States could do that around the world. You know, we could, instead of immediately saying, oh, there's an earthquake in Haiti, send the military. You know, there's Taliban in Afghanistan, which we put there. Let's send the military. You know, instead of doing that, working on things that are beneficial to each country, that would bring peace, and it would benefit everybody in a country, not just the ones who are working for profit. So yeah, there's a lot of misunderstanding about communism, socialism, foreign policy in the United States. It's almost like since the time we were born, we're thinking the U.S. has the most mighty military and we should just send it all over. If there's a problem, to the U.S. military to take care of it. When now we know that the U.S. military just makes things worse. So I try to just present the truth on these countries, especially Cuba and Venezuela, because like you said, a lot of so-called left-wing forces completely throwing Maduro under the bus have all along thrown Cuba under the bus, and with no real understanding of what actually is happening in these countries. And if the people of these countries didn't like their leadership, by this point, with all the sanctions, all the other interference, especially in places like Cuba and Venezuela and Nicaragua, the leadership would be gone because of all the U.S. interference. The only reason that the leadership and the revolution stay in place is because the people support them.
And then, what would you say in response to people who say that, who I'm sure they'll probably call us hypocrites, because they'll say, why do you support BDS on Israel? Why are you criticizing Saudi Arabia as an American ally, but you yourself are being select? I'm sure they'll probably accuse us of selective outrage. They'll say, why are you always criticizing Israel? Why are you always criticizing Saudi Arabia when Cuba yes, it may have a great healthcare system, a great education system, but there are political prisoners there. You guys don't like political prisoners. Look at Julian Assange. How come you guys don't speak up for the political prisoners of Cuba? And yeah, I mean, what would you say in response to those people?
Or how is it hypocritical to criticize allies of the United States when you're principal critic of the U.S. I'm a critic of the U.S. and in U.S. imperialism. Cuba and Venezuela and all these other countries that we've mentioned, if they have any bases outside of their own country, it's just one. They might have one base that's not a military base inside their own country. Of course, I support BDS on Israel because they're systematically destroying the Palestinian state. They're systematically killing. They were just bombing Gaza yesterday. And so a friend of the United States is, to be friends with the United States, there has to be something wrong with the country. And I have long kind of had this policy that if the United States is criticizing a leader or another country, I'm going to look closer at that, because I'm not just going to jump on the Russiagate bandwagon without looking at it. I'm not going to jump on the color revolutions without seriously seeing where are they coming from, who's funding them. So yeah, that's why I support these states. And, Cuba hasn't executed any prisoner for decades. Fidel put a moratorium on execution. And if somebody tells me Cuba has political prisoners, I'll just have to say, where are you getting your information from? So the United States we know the United States and Israel and Saudi Arabia have tons of political prisoners for sure. So, yeah, so I don't know. I just would say, I would tell people now, you can go to Cuba, see for yourself, go there. The cops don't even carry guns in Cuba.
But I'm pretty sure, some of those Cuban expats who, and I'm not going to, denigrate how they came to the country. I'm sure many of them, did flee, political persecution
They fled, or they flew. They flowed. They got out of Cuba because they were exploiting the Cuban people, and they took billions of dollars of wealth with them. The revolution was a people's revolution. It wasn't an oligarch revolution like the one in the United States actually was. It was really fomented by the oligarchy in the United States. And so those are the people in Florida and elsewhere who are telling all these terrible lies about the Cuban Revolution because they just can't have it all. They weren't willing to share. They weren't willing to share with the people of Cuba who had been exploited for generations by these people who had to leave, or they would have to share their wealth with the people.
So you don't accept the narrative, and this is just a narrative, and I'm just agnostic and objective on it. The narrative, from many of those Cuban expat communities in Miami or New York or Chicago or elsewhere, who who say that the Cuban Revolution, like the Russian Revolution, was yes, for once upon a time it was all people power, but then like George Orwell's Animal Farm, it became this this tyranny, and that's why I had to flee, and that's why many people are escaping from boats and stuff like that.
No. The reason the Cuban boat exodus was because of U.S. the embargo plus the collapse of the Soviet Union. They were starving, and did the U.S. say, oh my gosh, let's help Cuba survive this? No, the U.S. actually tightened the embargo during that time. So yeah, so people did leave because there was no food. They were literally starving to death.
So you think so you would say to any anti-war, anti-imperialist activist, be very weary of the pressures some will feel with Venezuelan expat community, Syrian expat community, and Cuban expat community when they say, please help us get involved in, toppling the.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, because they're mostly counter-revolutionaries. And I'm not going to be involved in a counter-revolution. I'd love to be involved in a revolution, but not a counter-revolution.
And but are there any truths do you find to some of the grievances expat Cubans have, or even Cubans within Cuba have towards the government and wanting, I guess, a multi-party system, a new left alternative as opposed to the sort of Marxist one that does exist there. Any half truths that that there are human rights abuses.
Of course, there's people who are opposition to any country. So they're not imprisoned. They're not rounded up and put in prison. So there's opposition forces everywhere, and there's people who aren't happy everywhere. And Cuba society, even from the beginning when I first started going, has kind of loosened up restrictions on things like ownership, small businesses, restaurants, and things like that. So people can own their own little restaurant or their own little store or something like that. So those things have kind of loosened up for some people. Some people don't like those changes. Some people say it's making the society a little less equal than they were. They're seeing these people who own these restaurants are like importing Mercedes-Benz and things like that, where it was just like, we have these cars that we had before the revolution, and we're going to keep them running forever. So yeah, there is, of course, in any society, there's tension and things like that. But I've never been into a place before, and I've been to many places around the world, where the people are so happy. They're always, they don't like stay locked up in their little pods. Every evening they all go out in their little neighborhoods. The kids play with each other. The teenagers congregate on the Malecón. It's just really and as a matter of fact, this is my last thing on Cuba, and we've been talking for a long time already, but I was watching a mainstream show here in the United States, and it was Josh Gaines. He has a like a travel show or something, and he went to Cuba to like find some treasure in the sea or whatever, and they were showing street scenes in Cuba. They were showing Old Havana. They were showing just people at the Malecón. They were in Havana. They weren't anywhere else, and he was like, wow. We've always been told this is a really oppressive society. He's like, everybody is singing and dancing. And, he just had his eyes just opened wide by just going down there. And that's what people in Venezuela, I used to, I knew Hugo Chavez. I know a lot of the leadership in Venezuela. Their basic thing is come and visit. If you want to know the truth, just come here and see. And there's no real reason that any American couldn't go to Cuba. Of course, it's only a $99 flight from Fort Lauderdale, but besides now, it's really hard to travel. But when we are allowed to travel, I would just really say, if you really want to go someplace that's warm, where the people are happy, that's just a beautiful society and a beautiful island, yeah, go to Cuba for vacation. They're on the Caribbean.
Then, and two very quick questions. Number one, in the future, if I could get somebody on, on 1+1 who has the complete opposite point of view on Cuba, would you be willing to come to have that debate?
I would say it depends.
Okay, then it's an idea we will
not
work
a yes
with.
or a no, but it depends. And so my grandkids always say, don't say maybe, that means no. But I'm not even saying maybe. I'm saying I will look at the invitation and consider it very carefully.
All righty, and then one final question. All right, then one final question is I wanted to talk to you about an extraordinary journalist, media critic, and NGO critic, the superb muckraker Whitney Webb, who I know you've had on your program. I was very honored to do a 3-part interview with her on her Epstein investigation. And Miss Webb, if you're listening to this, we really would love to have you back on 1+1. And yeah, so very briefly, I wanted to talk to you about Whitney Webb, and why is it that her extraordinary expose on Jeffrey Epstein and the criminal network behind him, which is the American mafia, the FBI, the American deep state, the UK deep state, the Israeli deep state, all colluding together to do this human trafficking, sexual trafficking ring, and a sexual using that as a sexual blackmail racket. Why is it that this extraordinary scoop that that Whitney Webb has done, and she has an amazing body of work.
She does. She's amazing. She is amazing.
Yeah, but why is it that? But how come so many left-leaning outlets are not touching this, are not citing her work, or not inviting her on to discuss this? Because you would think that because if you hate both political parties, as so much of these new left outlets do, and if you're involved in anti-human trafficking, anti-slavery, and very much against Israeli imperialism, British imperialism, and U.S. imperialism, you think invite Whitney Webb to talk about all this, and let's get these different people power movements together to campaign for some kind of justice and accountability. But and yet I always say in comment sections when I watch Whitney Webb's interviews that she's criminally underrated.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I just think it's a hot topic that could topple so many people, organizations, and is there really any truly left-wing publications or podcasts or whatever, like Cindy Sheehan Soapbox, that are free from this kind of taint? I'm not tainted with it. I'm not tainted by it. I would not care who got toppled, because they would deserve to be toppled, or they would deserve to be put in prison or ridiculed. I see the list of people that were on Jeffrey Epstein's Lolita Express, and I'm like, oh my God, how come they can still make movies? How come they can still be like the Clintons? How come they can still be walking around and not in prison or not ostracized by society? And just like how we get told the wars are good, there's a way that the establishment can bury stories, or there's a way the establishment can like, for me, example, that they can undermine what we do and what we say by trying to attack us. And I think that happens to Whitney too. She gets painted with this brush of conspiracy theorists when she is just like you said, an amazing journalist. And she doesn't like, I've never seen her bring emotions into what she writes. She doesn't write like me. I write mostly op-ed pieces, so I can like pour out all my emotions. She writes journalistic pieces that are backed by hard facts. She does her research. And so I just think people
Really
are
extraordinary. I mean, really extraordinary. I mean, and I
she's
even see.
amazing. And there's another woman who mostly does environmental things, Corey Morningstar. She's the
Yeah.
same way. She like is amazing. I've had both of them on the Soapbox, but she and it's like I said, people don't want to be fact-based anymore. They want to be emotional. It's all emotion and it's all fear-based. So I think this Jeffrey Epstein thing could really bring down all of the ruling class. And a lot of people are afraid. They're afraid if that would happen. Even left-ish kind of journalists. Of course, mainstream journalism isn't going to support her work at all. But I would be delighted. I would be delighted if it.
Yeah,
if
I mean, you know, and I'm not saying any names, but you know, I have, you know, some of the left leaning outlets that I'm subscribed to on YouTube, and I won't say any names, but but they haven't had Whitney Webb to talk about this amazing. I mean, first of all, the fact that they haven't had Whitney Webb on to talk about anything when it comes to Syria, Venezuela, you know, the coup that happened in Sudan, you know, the coup that happened in Sudan, and all that. That, I mean, that's already disappointing. But I guess if you already, you know, invite, you know, Max Blumenthal on your show or somebody like that on your show, okay, you've already covered it. You don't need somebody, you know, else on. But this Jeffrey Epstein thing, I mean, I mean, if I had to do like a book of of amazing journalism, you know, achievements, scoop of the centuries, that, you know, that one would be up there. And why she's not, and why she's not gotten, you know, numerous, you know, Izzy awards or awards named after, you know, Gary Webb or you know, anyways, it's just shocking, and I wanted, you know, I wanted your opinion on that because I know that we both mentioned how much we liked, you know,
let's start a Whitney fan club.
She's not on Facebook though, and she's on Twitter, and I'm not a big fan of Twitter either.
I'm not a Twitter either, so.
We'll organize a shirt. We need to get someone to organize a shirt that says "Read Whitney Webb's work." Like join her Patreon page or something like that.
Yeah, for sure. She really is she's very worthwhile. That's for she's substantial, super substantial.
Alrighty. Well, on that note, because you're very generous of your time, we were supposed to do it yesterday, but we both, you know, canceled.
Oh, you know what? By the time 5 o'clock rolled around, I had this major migraine from all the heat. So it's a good thing we rescheduled.
No problem. It was no problem. It was an awful heat wave yesterday, so it was you know, a bit of a blessing in disguise. And you were very generous with, you know, with your morning, you know, 10 a.m. in California. I mean, who else could be so generous with their time? So until then, ladies and gentlemen, we were joined on 1+1 with our returning champion, Cindy Sheehan. Check her out, Cindy Sheehan's Soapbox, and join. And she's the coordinator for the Women's March on the Pentagon, and that's womensmarchonthepentagon.com, right?
It's marchonthepentagon.com. We're actually not really active right now because of the pandemic, but I'm also I'd like to talk about another one of my efforts. We started something called Justice for COVID-19 Eldercide, because there's like 8 governors in the United States that have ordered nursing homes to take recovering COVID-19 patients, which has killed tens of thousands of elders here in the United States. So that's Justice for COVID-19 Eldercide, and we're trying to not let the issue be forgotten, and also to get some justice, some accountability for those tens of thousands of needless deaths.
And on top of that, one last thing I have to say to that is, you mentioned Cuba, and I got the chance to watch Dimitri Lascaris, who's running for the Green Party of Canada, former journalist for the Real News Network on all things the environment in Canada, and they were talking about Cuba, and I asked, the question, what has Cuba's response been to COVID-19? Because in the West, yeah, you mentioned it, Eldercide. The response of the West is basically let the old people die.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's not just in the United States. You're right. It's every country that has. Even Sweden had. They say that their response to the elders was pitiful. They even admit that. But of course, nobody in the United States admits that. Nobody in the United States admits.
Whereas in Cuba, no, they treat the patient like any other patient, and they try their damn hardest to.
I don't even know if there's nursing homes.
Iran as well. Even with all of its sanctions, they're saying, we're treating the elderly like we treat any patient, putting all of our, sources into making sure that they, try to live.
They basically just premeditated murder. And, to me, it's because of states have to support elders in long-term care facilities after their resources run out. Social Security, Medicare, Medi-Cal, other elder benefits, it's really heartbreaking. It's heartbreaking how callous this country is.
Well, I'll make sure before I upload this onto YouTube, SoundCloud, and elsewhere that you send me the link to this campaign, because it's a very important campaign. And on that note, it'll be to be continued. Next time we have you on, I definitely want to talk to you about that, because that is a huge, huge human rights scandal, along with the Epstein affair.
Absolutely.
So Cindy, enjoy the rest of your Sunday, and I look forward to having you back on the show in the future.
Perfect. Thank you.